We're here in LA, downtown LA. Let's check out Craft and Taylor. Come see my boy Cameron, talk about some vintage pieces he has. Maybe I'll buy some there. We're trying to keep it light today. I also wanted to check out his showroom, his office. Really creative guy, amazing pieces. If you don't know him, follow him on Instagram. So come on, let's go check him out.
I feel sometimes like a crazy person, like getting on an airplane, flying 18 hours, picking up a watch, or meeting with somebody who has a similar, if not or shared passion to mine. And this stuff makes me feel normal because I don't think doing what I do and devoting my life to this is normal at all. And so I kind of feel like I'm like an outsider or a weirdo. But then when I have those conversations with people that share the same passions as I do, it's really cool and it kind of makes me in a way feel normal. Or the other thing that I really love about kind of the community of collecting, whether cars, watches, art, architecture, or whatever, it's kind of like give and take where I'm giving information or my perspective on something and maybe inspiring somebody to look at something differently. But then at the same time, I'm always kind of constantly fed that different, perspective or whatever. I'm like, I've never looked at that piece this way or that object or whatever. And so what's cool is that the people that I've met, the clients, friends, we're all different, but there's that kind of common connection point. And a lot of it's through other stuff too. Like you find, oh, this guy's into Porsches or cars, or this guy's into this artist or this, music. So to go back to your point, I think it's interesting, explore that and also feel inspired or have my perspective change or grow as a result of kind of being involved in it.
When we're building artists, we touch a lot on that because I always say I define an artist by two things when I'm trying to build them out. The colors, which is like what you're talking about, your sound, and then the poise of collectivity. And I use it definitely in building the brand of the artist because if I can get a fan to love you for the music, but other things, that connection that fan will have with you is great as it begins. And it's just how we relate, right? Like we could talk about Porsche, we could talk about watches, we could talk about music, but all of a sudden we have a lot of the same interests, and that's how we build relationships and even partnerships. And so you find that, and so we use that a lot in defining like what are those 5 or 6 interests that you love. We try to build the artists in those communities beyond, I said to put out music, but no, if you love gaming, then let's start going to all the gaming conventions and get me involved. Because in that crowd is like, I love his music and I love the fact he talks my language. When you're especially in things like collecting, you're obsessive about it. When you get home, you watch all the YouTubes, you go to the conference, and you think about it, you always have a Grail watch that you're like looking for and you're excited for. To me, that's the proper way to build an artist and even build a brand, like attaching those things. So
I think with watches and all these other things too, it's like are kind of in a way like coming back, because I think in this digital age, in this world that we live in, and I love it, we're able to connect with people now in kind of these like little micro communities that share the same passion or interests or same specific flavor of ice cream, right? Especially with watches, it's like, I'm really into like late 60s Movados, right? And before, you would maybe be one guy that you kind of be out there on your own, and now through technology, through social media, through all this stuff, you would kind of connect with those people that have that same mindset. But I think the thing that is cool with watches as it relates to culture, art, design, is there is that human element. And that's the thing that I think makes this so unique and special, similar to like the automotive side of things, or art or music or whatever else. I think that for a while, especially in this kind of like new generation of things, was kind of like forgotten. It kind of became so consumable and so disposable, where that's kind of coming back around to, be more celebrated, and people are kind of connecting, and it's people connecting over these things. And the funny thing with watches, especially that I noticed in my own collecting, is that, it's like the Grail within watches can be something that is not really monetarily expensive or can be wildly expensive. And the community like gets that, like the flex is more so the passion now than it is like that specific item or object or whatever. So I think that's kind of the interesting shift with, kind of the watch world and the collecting community, is that it's that I'm putting importance on versus just like chasing next big piece or kind of leading to that milestone or whatever it is. And I also think that, this was a community that was kind of like in a weird way gatekept for a long time. It was kind of, I don't want to say a good old boys club, but the watch collector, similar to like the art collector, they were kind of a certain set of people. But now I think that all types of generations, people, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and that's like more welcome today. And I think that that's a result of like maybe technology and social media. And that's kind of the positive of that, maybe kind of more sterile, stagnant generation that's kind of trimming.
I agree. That's like extremely well said, because I do agree that that the opening of, again, I didn't even realize that there was this culture. Like, I've been collecting for a while, but it was very much, especially before, I would say before COVID, where the collecting of watches for most people was like, oh, one day I'll have a Rolex, and that's gonna extend of my collections. I get to buy one watch that signifies I've made it, to now where it's like the appreciation of the actual design of something that just reminds you of childhood. Like, I collect a lot of art toys, for example, and a lot of music toys. A lot of what I live in now is like all the things I loved as a kid and what has that meaning in my life. So like I have the expensive watches, but I have things that are in $2,000 that, where that was a race car driver, and they remind me of when that race, and just that feeling. And that's one of the things that, as I'm getting into community and I'm speaking out to the music community outside or the entertainment community, it's kind of opening their eyes to, okay, there's this whole other world that is really just yesterday. A big artist that I know who like collects a lot of things, he did me about Porsches and watches because he's not really into it. Yeah, he's like, but what's the most badass Porsche I can get? I literally said what you just said. It's like the badass thing is just having one. Yeah, because you're a part of this community, and as long as you love it, that's really the flex. It's not, I'm gonna go get the rarest Porsche or whatever it is. Sure. And it's the same thing with watches. It's like, for me, what really got me into vintage was I don't want to have the watch and everyone else had in our business. So like, I've never been into vitriol, and I respect what they've been technology. It just hasn't been my thing. Like, yeah, I've always been historically into smaller watches. So when everybody was doing the offshore, I was like, nah, I'm gonna do the 39 millimeters of.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know Yanni from Material Good.
Yeah.
Yanni's a really good friend, Michael, who owns it, and they used to be like, you're crazy.
I think the other thing too that's like so exclusive, and I had a similar kind of story and feeling to your story. When I was in tech, these guys would, there was money and there was success and all that kind of stereotypical stuff. But the thing I noticed is there was a lot of like, there wasn't an element of independence, right? So for me, say I had like an old vintage salon. The cool thing about that was like, I was the only guy in the room with that on. You remove price point, remove any of that kind of stuff. It was like, that to me was luxury. That was exclusivity. And the thing that kind of spawned from that is also the experience and the way that I felt about that piece. So I think these things for me are kind of like these little vehicles to facilitate an experience versus, just having it, or the kind of objectified thing of just acquiring this stuff. For me, it's about, how does this make me feel? Regardless of the price point, all that stuff, right? How does this item make me feel? And how does that change the world I'm living in, right? It could be a watch, it could be a car, it could be a pair of clothing, it could be a record. And I also think like the other thing, maybe similar to like the music side, is, how does that make you feel? What experience are you having? And I think like that's the really cool thing about music, is like there's all these different artists, there's all these different genres, there's all this like different stuff. When I think of like some of the most important music for me, I think there's these memories, these tangible things. There's like this Madonna track that just like popped up into my head the other day. And I remember maybe I heard it like on a radio or something, or like in the background, something like that. And I kind of wasn't aware, but it kind of popped into my head, and it brought me back to like being in the car in 1989, like with my mom driving around. It was like the hit song, that like emotion, right? That memory, that tangible thing is as a result of that track, right? So I think like that's the thing that I really like with these things, is they're like these vehicles to like transport you to a time or place, maybe past, maybe present, maybe future. And that's the thing that I love about watch collecting and collecting as a whole.
Something that happened in my world is the moment I entered the industry, right, the film and the music industry, so of that excitement of going to a concert.
You get to see behind the curtain. Look at it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you get access to everything. So you start being able to be like, well, cool, I'm seeing this, but like, I've seen this show 20 times. Where before it was like you were saving to get that one thing, right? Yeah. A large part of my career I feel like I don't want to go to a concert. I don't want to. It's just been recently that I've been like, people pay for this. I'm so blessed to get to go, and I try to like change my mindset. But do you feel that way where it's like, you know, when you're collecting, you gotta chase to get these things, but since this is also your business, you now have 50 watches that you can essentially put on and have and or like walk around while somebody buys it. Has it changed the feeling like it does for me?
I think one of the fortunate things, and maybe I'm the outlier here a little bit, because I've seen guys come up in the business and kind of transition from being like the collector to the dealer. And I think there definitely is a shift in that, right? The one thing that I think hasn't changed for me is the passion for the items that I'm chasing. And I think you can kind of see that in the collection that we curate that is actually for sale. For me personally, I've never really resonated with like blue two-tone Submariner. They're great watches. I could have bought and sold a bunch of them and made money, great. I never could kind of get behind it myself. And there's nothing wrong with a watch, but just for me personally, I resonate with that. I don't think I've ever even like had one, right, for sale, even though I'm offered them all the time and there could be money and spread there to cut up, right, and make. But I think for me personally, I'm still just as passionate about this stuff as when I was a collector. And I think that's maybe one of the elements of like the secret sauce for us personally. And one of our differentiating elements is that there are things that, you know, we acquire or find and kind of like hiding it in the back of the safe, you know, maybe like, oh, let's put this back here. I don't think we need to photograph that yet. Maybe we don't need to put it on Instagram yet, because like I still have that like love, and there's still stuff that like I come across and I'm like, man, I can make great money on this, but I'm keeping it. So I think I'm fortunate from that perspective, having tenure in the business, having kind of gone through the meat grinder of any business to still have that passion. And there's still stuff that I chase. I mean, obviously this is kind of a small snippet of like the weirdness of my collecting, but like that Rolex clock, for example, like they're crazy rare, they're crazy cool. I'll never sell that, you know? And I'm still passionate about those things, and I'm very fortunate. But I have seen other guys kind of get chewed up in the meat grinder, and then they kind of get spit out on the other end, and they lose the passion and their vibe for that, because they look behind the curtain, and to your point, it kind of loses, you know, there's that saying that don't beat your heroes.
That was one of the things in this career I've had is the majority of my heroes, especially the people that I was massive fans of, I either got a chance to work with or work highly disappointed, right? Like, yeah, it's like, why did I meet him? I shouldn't have worked. It's really interesting. I find that, like, you know, again, so much so of the things that drive us sometimes as humans is the idea that unattainable thing keeps the drive going. And
yeah,
so is it really interesting you still are able to keep that? Because for me, it's been a change of mentality. Now I'm re-engaging in, I get to go hang out and drive with Charlie.
Yep.
Wow, I'm so blessed to do this. Where like maybe 2 years ago, I was like, yo, can we leave now? So I'm recapturing that love I had with the opportunities that I've been granted. But for a long time, I was just soured about like, don't buy me your concert, bro. Not.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, you know, with the travel and like pushing as hard as we do, like one of the things that we've done over the past 2 years is like we be in these areas all over the world, like hunting watches. We created like these watch buyers guide. So like we have a watch buyers guide for Tokyo, we have one for Paris, we have one for Milan, we have one for London, right? One of the things that I kind of noticed too, to your point, is that I wanted to kind of get back to that community. I'm going to all these places, kind of vetting all these dealers, like kind of highlighting what each person has and kind of having that experience, kind of just for me. I wasn't able to share that. And so one of the things that was cool is, great example of this, Hong Kong. There's this guy in the middle of central Hong Kong. It's on this street, I think called Pottingbridge Street. And this guy is probably in his 70s. He has like this little stand. It literally is like the size of this like sofa cushion, right? And he has these incredible watches. And this guy's like an old timer. No Instagram, no fax machine, only cash, right? But he's these incredible watches. And so we go to, his name is Raymond. We go to Raymond and we would buy watches and find all these amazing things. And I kind of shared that with the community. And now every time I go see Raymond in Hong Kong, like comes up, gives me a big hug. I get these photos from people like, hey, I bought this from Raymond. I'm like so stoked on it, right? And I love that because it was like this thing that, you know, I could have chose to kind of gatekeep it, or I could have chosen not to share. But now, as a result of sharing, I get to kind of like relive that experience of acquisition through the clients that we send there. Or he'll see me, he's like, oh, I sold this incredible watch, this incredible person, and to help facilitate that, you know, makes me feel really good. And it also kind of brings me back into that kind of perpetual excitement of like, okay, great, like hundreds of day dates and hundreds of subs and all these different protects, right? And the way that I've kind of avoided that burnout is by kind of sharing that excitement with the customer all over again, you know? So that's something something I think that I've noticed. I don't think it was intentional, but that's one of the ways that, as a result of like kind of giving back, I've been able to kind of perpetually recreate that excitement through, you know, these customers and collectors and people. This is another 70s era. This is a Cartier tank jumbo, and it's also automatic. So that's the bubble on the back. So crazy, because Cartier tanks are normally in this size here.
Yeah.
This is kind of your standard tank Louis Cartier, but this is like oversized, and it's also an automatic movement, where most Cartier out of this era would be
Boards.
yeah, or mechanical.
Mechanically, yeah.
Yeah,
That's the Movado movement, right?
it's a Movado watch. Yes, it's a Movado N95. The difference between an M90 and an M95 is the number of registers on a chronograph. So M90 has 2, but this has 3, so it's an N95. But really early, we're thinking this is probably from like 1940 on.
Isn't it crazy how it can survive?
That's the thing that I chirp about, right? Like, think about what was happening in like the early 40s. We were on the verge of World War II, leaving the 30s. The U.S. didn't get involved until later, but like somebody was buying this and shit was happening in the world,
Yeah.
right? And this, you know, was
Beautiful.
not like, you know, it wasn't spam, it wasn't like bread, it was, you know, a luxury item, and also a complicated one, a chronograph being like used for timing things and that kind of stuff. What's interesting about this is it's actually reversed. So yeah, that will start and stop the chrono. It's probably not wound.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the Movado, you know, N series of movements, N90s and N95s, the start and stop is at the like the 4 or 5 o'clock position. Yeah.
How much does a piece like this go for?
That would be like in the $30,000 range, like 29,000, or I'm sorry, around 20,000.
Yeah.
A normal just gold and M95 chrono would be like $8,000, but the fact that it's Cartier, Brigade numerals, those little details make up the biggest difference when it comes to this kind of stuff. The thing that trips me out with stuff like this is like, that's woven white gold, right? And so to make something like that, that's all done by hand. Nobody would do that today because it is so cost prohibitive. Like to weave gold into a bracelet is crazy. They're like, no thanks, that's so much. Yeah. But the other thing too is the way that like kind of like, it's almost like slinky on the wrist, you know? It like really moves and is, you know, kind of ergonomic.
I always think like it's so interesting how these brands, like, first of all, the amount of watches, right, historically that they make.
Yep.
Hundreds and hundreds of watches, but then you have to be able to categorize, like, okay, who am I selling this watch to, right? And like, what is that? And, you know, in comparison to perpetual calendar and where that marketing goes, it's really interesting, especially because just the amount of product that they push out and the amount of dial colors and movements and subtle little tiny variances.
Yeah, it makes such a huge difference.
Maybe that was their only watch, but that was kind of the intent behind buying things, is buying something that was of quality. Like the luxury factor really didn't come into play.
Yeah. Especially because it was probably the only watch they could actually afford. And
But I think people also like bought things they knew were, like you bought a car and that was the car that you were gonna have for 20 years. Or you bought an item. And I think that's really interesting if you look at the origins of luxury, like Louis Vuitton, for example. He was a bellhop. He was dealing with people's like luggage all the time. And he realized that, you know, if he coated them with a canvas, he could protect people's goods. And that's how that developed into a luxury brand. So luxury was really associated more with quality instead of like hype.
yeah,
What's wild about this watch is I just kind of get lost in it. You know, it's like, this band's been on here for a minute, but I think like a really nice tan or like a black pigskin, something that kind of has like a more vintagey aesthetic.
yeah.
And that's the fun thing about this shit is like, you know, change a band, you basically get a watch.
And a bunch made for the crafts. Yeah. And I had these done my initials and all that, you know, really.
Who made the straps for it?
It's the place in New York.
That's fun too, like going in, picking out.
Don't even have the redditors. It was really, because the one that originally came with was, you know, too short. Now I got Cartier because I sent it to service, and then they essentially put a new band on the line. But I got a few cool colors from them. Yeah, you know, really interesting. Their work is amazing. It's kind of beyond. And I love how they stamp your initials. They just, you know, really beyond. This kind of stuff is definitely like, this is in my wheelhouse all day.
It's crazy.
This is the kind of stuff I'm attracted to. That it's like, you know, I've never seen this watch. You know,
I'm yet to see another one. I'm sure that there are a couple out there for sure, but I think that's the cool thing about Cartier in this era. We were talking about that. Like, somebody came in and like most of the early Cartier stuff, it wasn't stuff that was like on display for retail.
Yeah.
You had to like, you know, kind of similar today, acquire it. And that's the interesting thing about, you know, like even maybe like some of the early Tiffany stuff, Cartier, is they were first and foremost jewelers, but they also kind of appealed to that, you know, horological client as well. And so I think that's interesting to like kind of take care of that client, but to do it in a way that's like very thoughtful, very intentional.
And Cartier, just like Tiffany, is probably, I would say, out of all the retailers, the two retailers that is the kind of thing you pass on to your kids. Like I have so many of my friends who are women who have a Conterra from years ago or have an old Cartier that their mom passed on and their mom, grandma passed on. And so that's what I find so interesting, that even though it's not Rolex, there's this kind of complicated movements all the time. I mean, the crash and have this massive complicated movement, but it's something that you pass on like tanks to, you know, your kids, and it just keeps on getting. So I love that about Cartier as a brand, that it just still holds that prestige in any room. And in time, and I would say Tiffany more with the diamonds more than even Cartier, but like Cartier jewelry is something you pass on forever.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the beauty. I mean, here's the perfect example of that. Like, you don't see a lot of retailers have this level of staying power where a watch from, you know, 50 years, 60 years is still in that good of condition. Love that, bro. I appreciate you. We'll definitely be talking about this watch. Cool.